The crumbling gray stone front of 4311 N Street stared down at me as I pulled up outside. The old office building had a dark, cold feeling to it, causing me to shiver momentarily. As I cut the engine and the rattle of my old Honda ceased abruptly. There were stories told about this building, and not the feel-good, happy kind. Rumor had it that the century-old tower was cursed. Unexplainably high death rates of those working in the building were the first clue, but there were others. The elevators broke down with people in them constantly. There were accidents and injuries far beyond the norm. At least once a year, someone jumped from the roof. I looked in the back seat and grabbed the insulated pizza bag and a crumpled paper sack filled with dipping sauce and soda. The smell of pizza wafted into my nostrils for the 1000th time that night, and for once it didn't make me hungry. Instead, I just felt tired and sick to my stomach. It had been a long day. Heading to the front entrance, part of me wondered who could be here so late at night. It was past 11, and I would have thought that most workers would have gone home for the day. But when I buzzed the number that I had been given to let me in, a man answered in a tired-sounding voice. "Hello?" His words came through the intercom, fuzzy and filled with static. "Hey, it's Puccino's Pizza. I got your pie." "Yeah, come on up. I'm on floor 19. Just go left after you get off the elevator. It's the only room with the lights still on." The man sounded exhausted, and I felt some sympathy for him. At least I would get to go home after this delivery. He sounded like he was still going to be here for a while working late. Nobody orders a pizza at the office if they're planning on going home for supper. He buzzed me in, and I walked through a set of glass doors and then another, entering into an enormous foyer. The place looked old on the outside, but within it was sleek and modern. They had probably renovated it in the last 10 years by the looks of things. The lobby was all polished steel and glass, aside from one ominous gray stone wall. There was a fireplace straight ahead, like a guidepost leading visitors towards the elevators. As I approached the fireplace, I saw that it was large, almost as tall as me, with a flue of shining steel that stretched up indefinitely, disappearing into the high ceiling above. The place made me feel tiny. It was like being in the house of a giant at the top of a beanstalk. I was completely alone, my footsteps echoing in the dim and empty space. There was something creepy about being here by myself in the night, when this place was normally occupied with hundreds of people, busily marching about with cell phones in hand, high-heeled shoes and leather soles clicking across the polished marble floors, voices buzzing as they mingled together in a cacophony of business talk. But suddenly all that was gone. I had been inside this building before. Normally a receptionist would be here to greet me at the front desk, but I guess they had gone home at this late hour. There wasn't even a janitor or a cleaning lady, mopping floors or shining the windows. Only me. When I arrived at the elevator, I hit the button to go up. It glowed a faint orange, and after a few seconds, an elevator door behind me opened with a ding. I got inside, and I tried to remember what the floor the man had said. After such a long day, the number of apartments and addresses were blending together, and I couldn't remember if it was floor 18 or 19. My delivery slip was no help either, as it only had the street address and a random buzzer number. Instead of settling on one floor, I hit both buttons at the same time, thinking that I would peek my head out and see if there was anyone on the 18th floor before going up to the 19th. I was pretty sure that it was the latter of the two, but this seemed like the quickest way to check. The last thing that I wanted was to be wandering the dark, empty floor of some abandoned office space in the middle of the night. This place was creepy enough as it was without any of that. As the elevator ascended, I heard my stomach gurgle noisily. I had skipped dinner and now it was catching up with me. I felt lightheaded and nauseated, and my ears were buzzing slightly, and a migraine was forming, with a dull pressure behind my eyes, making them feel like overinflated balloons about to pop. Finally, the elevator dinged and I stepped off, rubbing my eyes. When I opened them, I looked around and saw that I was in a hallway with faded yellow wallpaper. The patterns on it looked retro and out of date. It reminded me of a set for a low-budget version of Mad Men, or some movie which had taken place in the 50s or 60s, only more depressing. The fluorescent lights overhead were flickering ever so slightly, as if they needed to be replaced, and I began to instinctively move away from them down the hall, trying to avoid making my headache worse. "Go left after you get off the elevator," I said to myself, thinking this had to be the right floor. The lights were all on, and despite the poor quality of them, most other sections of the building were blacked out, as seen from outside. As I walked down the hallway looking for an office door, I saw none. It was like this corridor was all perfectly smooth yellow walls leading towards a turn. Overhead, the lights continued flickering constantly, making me feel even more sick. There was something wrong with the electrical system on this floor of the building, I had guessed. The hallway broke to the right at the end, so I followed it and turned, looking off down another long stretch of unbroken corridor. At the end of this hallway, there was a left turn, and I figured that was where the office would be. I couldn't help but think that this was an odd configuration for an office. Very odd. Suddenly, I noticed the smell was getting stronger as I walked. It was a powerful odor of mildew, as if I were in an old, rotted basement. This section of the building must have had a recent flood from a bursted pipe or something like that, I thought to myself. The floor was squishy and wet beneath my feet, and I could feel it starting to soak through the seams of my cheap running shoes and moistening my socks. I kept walking, thinking I would have to ask the customer about this weird turn of events once I finally made it to him. But once I got to the end of the corridor, it just led on to another identical hallway. Another long, yellow-walled passageway, leading about 50 yards towards a turn. Whatever this floor was, it was not the right one. It was like a maze of some sort, and I wondered if it was once an escape room that somebody had created at a great cost which had fallen into disrepair. That would explain the layout of the place, not to mention the smell and the water damage. Maybe they had closed for the pandemic and never reopened again. I knew a few places like that. Deciding that that was likely the case, I turned around and began to head back towards the elevator. Obviously, the man had been on the 19th floor after all, and the more that I thought about it, the more sure I became. The man had said, floor 19, turn left from the elevators and look for the first door with the light on. So I went back the way that I had come, only to find that it wasn't the same as I had left it. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. The walls were the same urine yellow color, with the same hideous, outdated patterns on them. But the corridor had turned right instead of left at the end. It didn't make sense. I had exited the elevator and gone left down the hallway and turned right at the end. I remembered specifically that it was a right turn, and I was 100% certain of that fact. But now it was the opposite. Where the hallway should have turned 90 degrees to the left, leading back to the elevators, it was now another right turn leading away from them. It was like I had entered some strange mirror world where nothing was how I had left it seconds before. Feeling the wallpaper with my hands, I searched for a seam or a hidden panel, thinking that this had to be a trick. I was suddenly picturing a YouTube gag. Maybe I had unwittingly been set up and I was on that prank show on Netflix hosted by Dusty from Stranger Things. My mind raced with possibilities, but none of them felt right. Everything felt awful and wrong with those fluorescent lights constantly flickering overhead, and that horrible musty wet smell always in my nostrils. Man, it made me want to puke. Alright, think, I told myself. There has to be a way out. If this was an escape room, was it automated to make the walls move in chains to disorient people? No, that seemed too far-fetched. And besides, I couldn't find any marks in the floor or any spaces in the walls to allow something like that. No one could make a place that constantly changed like that. It was like something from a horror movie or a science fiction show. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't explainable, and it wasn't being done by a person. I was very sure of that now. And my knees were wobbly as I realized that I was trapped in a place that I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't a regular floor of an office building. It was only disguised to look like that. It was like a trap to lure humans inside, the same way that hunters would ensnare an animal. It was a glitch between our reality and the one next to it. A scar in the onion skin of the multiverse, allowing me to slip between layers. My heart began to race as sweat rolled down my cheeks and my hands trembling as I picked at my nails, a nervous habit that I had picked up from my late father. A lump rose in my throat as nausea overcame me and I hurled all over the soggy carpeting, dropping my pizza box to the floor where it sank into the shack with a wet, squelching sound. The mildew smell was only getting worse, I realized, as if I were going deeper and deeper into a sickening basement filled with mold. And disbelief ran through my mind for a few seconds. I was tired. I had simply been on autopilot and I had taken another turn without realizing it. I would walk around that corner and around after that to find the elevator sitting there waiting for me. I had made an extra turn, that was all. It was so simple. Sure, I had thought there was only 2 turns, but it had been a long day. My mind was playing tricks on me and that was all. I breathed an unsteady sigh of relief. With that thought firmly planted in my mind, I began to march purposefully down the hallway. And then I realized that I had forgotten the pizza and I raced back to get it. But it was gone. The thermal insulated bag, which would cost me $50 to replace if I lost it, as well as the customer's order. It was all missing. Vanished as if somebody had walked through the wallpaper and taken it, and then disappeared again behind the yellow facade. But the walls were still smooth and blank, not a door or a light switch to be seen. There were no Wi-Fi routers attached to the ceiling, no thermostats on the walls or motivational posters like in a regular office, only flickering fluorescent lights and soggy shag carpeting, yellow wallpaper, and hopeless despair. I took out my cell phone thinking that I would call for help. Somebody would find a way to rescue me from this place, whatever it was. I just needed to dial 911 and wait for authorities to arrive. But my phone had no signal. Despite my close proximity to 100 different cell towers, this place was blocking any chance of reaching the outside world. Attempting to dial 911, I found that it wouldn't go through. Nothing would go through. Texts, calls, emails, everything was blocked due to a lack of signal. The thinking icon on my phone just spun around in hopeless circles, never finding an answer. And desperate to get out of this place, I began to run back the way that I had come in, not caring when the hallways didn't go where I expected them to. I just sprinted, terrified, turning down one random corridor after the next, thinking maybe if I ran fast and hard enough, how could I run this place and I would find myself back in front of the elevators again. My feet squelched and I sunk deeper into the shag carpeting, further with each step that I took, as if the furry material beneath my feet was getting longer, like grass left unmowed. No matter how long I ran for, the elevators remained stubbornly hidden, as if they had blended back into the walls as soon as I had exited them, like alien cloaking equipment in a science fiction movie. And either way, the place was changing. Every time that I left one space and came back to check, it was different than it was before. Finally, the zigzagging corridors ended. I found myself in an empty yellow room. The shag carpeting was now up to the tops of my shoes and I felt like I was sinking into it more with each step. It was like quicksand sucking at my heels and making me exhausted as I fought against it. Like tiny hands were grasping and pulling at my feet. A filing cabinet sat in one corner of this new room, abandoned. A pencil sat atop it. These were the only signs of anything different that I had seen since getting off the elevator. stumbling toward it like a desert walker finding an oasis. I grabbed onto the filing cabinet and felt its cool steel, trying to judge for myself whether it was an illusion or not. It felt real. I picked up the pencil and found that its lead had been removed and it was just a hollow tube of wood now. Useless. I had hoped that I could use it to write a message to tell somebody that I had been here, but that wouldn't work now. How long had I been wandering this place for? Suddenly I couldn't remember. It felt like a very, very long time, but strangely, I wasn't hungry anymore. I tried to open the filing cabinet but found the drawers were locked. Attempting to pick the whole thing up, I discovered that it was attached securely to the floor, as if it was bolted in place. Part of me wanted to pick it up and throw it, smashing it through one of those disgusting yellow walls, hoping to break through to the other side. But what would I find if I did? If there were more sickly yellow walls and endless twisting corridors, I would lose my mind completely. I tried to pound on the walls of the room with my fist, but found that they were sturdy and unyielding, just like all the others. The only way out was to move forward or to move backward. Suddenly, either one seemed like the same option. The fluorescent lights were particularly bad in this room, flickering with a mind-numbing buzz that would drive most men insane within a matter of minutes. And I had been in here for a while. Again, the concept of time seemed meaningless, as my phone had stopped working and the little clock at the top of the screen was stuck at 11:17 p.m., around the time when I'd gotten into the elevator. But I had been in here for hours, it felt like, maybe longer. If somebody told me that it had been days, I wouldn't have argued. But then again, if somebody else had insisted it was just a few minutes, I would have believed them too. Finally, I got so sick of the flickering hum of the overhead lights that I moved on to the next room. This one was empty. When I looked back, so was the previous one that I had exited, despite the fact that I had just hugged the cold steel filing cabinet like a newborn moments prior. I wished that I had brought the pencil with me as some trophy or souvenir of reality, decaying and broken as it was. I vowed that if I came across something else like that, I would take it, just so that I could hold it in my hand and tell myself that I wasn't crazy, that something else existed besides me, and the damp, shag carpet, yellow wallpaper, and flickering fluorescent lights. But room after room stood empty and unadorned, as I marched through their doorways from one to the next, and then I was back out in the hallways again, roaming through dim corridors with broken fluorescent lights strobing overhead. The same exact, unstopping pale yellow wallpaper remained stubbornly plastered on the walls. Something was different in this section, though. It was a feeling rather than something observable. A feeling like eyes on the back of my neck watching me. I got the impression that I was traveling deeper and deeper into the lair of some horrible monster, getting closer to its mildew-stinking breath. My feet were soaked now and I took off my shoes, tired of the wet squelching sound that they were making constantly. It didn't feel any better walking barefoot, but that sound was gone at least, and that helped. The migraine, which had been forming as a dull pressure within my eyeballs, had now spread outwards and infected my forehead, my temples, and the top of my dome. I could feel the vein throbbing above my eye, a signal of the stress that I was under. I kept hearing footsteps behind me and it was making me nervous, but whenever I looked back, there was nobody there. As I rounded the next corner, a thought occurred to me. I pretended to keep walking, to move my feet in even smaller cycles so that it sounded as if I was moving away from the corner. And then I peeked my head around the wall and checked to see if someone was following me, and to my horror, there was. I ducked back behind the wall, my heart skipping several beats and fluttering in my chest. Terrified, I checked again and the thing was gone, as if I had just imagined it all. But the image of it was still in my mind. A humanoid form which was creeping towards me on all fours, its legs bent and twisted, elongated and warped. Its eyes were yellow, the same color as the walls of this place, but its skin was covered in a fine black coating of fur, Or shag carpeting, maybe. It had moved with an oily quickness, almost as if it weren't a solid form but a liquid. Its teeth had looked solid though, and sharp, and I had maintained eye contact with it for just long enough to see it start to smile, a wide grin creeping outwards and spreading from the corners of its lips. Picturing it again, I began to run. The mildew smell was so bad now that it was suffocating, and instead of getting used to it, I found it was only affecting me more. It reminded me of when my dog had gotten skunked and had run all over the house and gotten on all the furniture before we could get any of the skunk oil off of her fur. That smell from a distance was only mildly unpleasant, but once you sat in it for a few days, it was unbearable. I would have done anything to get rid of it. A chemical, acrid, horrible smell which invaded my senses, and it made me feel more sick every day that I was around it. This was like that, but 1,000 times worse. The mildew felt like it was growing inside of me now, and I could imagine spores of it turning into mushrooms in my lungs as I ran. Just as I had thought that, I looked down and saw what I had just imagined. Actual mushrooms were growing in the corner of this room as I ran through it. That made me slow down to a walk again, as I realized that I was in a room now and not a hallway. This one was larger than the others, but the lighting and moisture and the smell were just as bad. I stumbled forward and found that the shag carpeting was dragging at my feet even more here, pulling me down into it with a force that was hard to resist. But I pressed onward, terrified of what would happen if I stopped. There were remnants of a kitchen in the next room, a fridge and a pair of cabinets with a sink. It reminded me of a break room in an office. I wandered over to the fridge, opening it to find a couple of shelves sparsely populated with moldy food. There was a sandwich blooming with blue and white fungus and a sunken brown apple sitting next to it. Covering my nose with my sleeve, I closed the fridge door and tried to hold my breath until the stink was gone. When I finally did breathe again, it was no better than before. Curious, I went over to the sink and turned on the water, wondering what would happen if I did. It spit out some brown, muddy-looking liquid for a few seconds and then it stopped, dripping afterwards for a while. I didn't feel hungry or thirsty, I realized, and I wasn't tired. And it was a good thing, too. The creature that I had seen following me suddenly appeared above me on the ceiling, racing into the room in a way that I had not expected. It was like a giant, black four-legged spider as it approached quickly, and then it dropped down on me, pinning me to the disgusting, warm, wet floor. The shag carpeting gave way beneath me, and I felt like I was yielding and buckling, drawing me down into it. Snarling with teeth gnashing, the creature tried to snap and bite at my face as I pushed it away, trying to get it off of me. Its drool was dripping onto me as it snapped its teeth, raking its claws across my forearms and my face as I fought it. The thing was quick and angry, but I had the size advantage. I managed to roll and shove it off of me, kicking it hard in the face afterwards. Surprisingly, the creature whimpered and ran off, like a wounded animal, but I had a feeling that it would be back. I tried to rise to my feet, but the moist shag carpeting was refusing to let me at first. It was grabbing and pulling on my clothing and at my exposed skin, like leather on a hot day. Finally, I managed to get away from it and rose to my feet with an effort. Looking around, I tried to remember which doorway I had used to enter the room, but suddenly I couldn't. Then again, it didn't seem to matter anymore. There was no way out of this place. I was trapped here for eternity. This was purgatory. I guessed that I wasn't good enough for heaven, and I wasn't quite fit for the other one either. Hello? I heard a voice from behind me say. I spun around, seeing a woman standing behind me in the doorway. Terrified of what horrors this place had in store for me next, I stumbled backwards until I crashed into the fridge. It didn't rock back and forth like a regular refrigerator, instead staying firmly planted like a boulder. The woman wasn't attacking me. She wasn't racing towards me on all fours with sharp teeth and claws. She wasn't trying to eat my face. These were all very good signs. "Who are you?" I asked nervously. The woman looked almost as scared as me as I did of her, but then her face softened and she actually smiled at me. "You're real, aren't you?" she asked. Last I checked." I felt myself returning her smile. "I saw you fight off that creature. It doesn't make sense for this place to attack one of its own. But then again," the woman trailed off. Then again, sometimes it surprises me. Sometimes this place really catches you off guard." "How long have you been here?" I asked as she approached me hesitantly from the other side of the room. "I'm not sure," she said, opening the fridge. "Time is sort of funny here." There's nothing in there," I began to say when she cut me off. "Oh, I know, I was trying to get the door off when I heard you coming." She began to pull and twist the door of the fridge, yanking on it and trying to pop it from its seams. "Why?" "Oh, come on. You've never wanted to try breaking through one of those walls. Maybe this could do it." I began to help her, using all of my force to pull the refrigerator door from its hinges, but it wouldn't budge. It's no use. Anything you can take with you is useless around here. This place doesn't let you get any advantage on it. "Yeah," I said, thinking of the pencil with no lead, the moldy sandwich, and the locked filing cabinet. "Hey, how did you wind up in this place?" The woman explained how she had gotten on the elevator at 4311 N Street, hitting 2 buttons by mistake. "Hey, me too," I said. "Which ones did you press?" She thought about this. "I don't remember, it was so long ago." An idea seemed to strike her just then. "Hey, give me a boost, I want to try something." I cut my hands and she began to climb up on top of the fridge. And then she pulled something from her pockets and it was a set of car keys. She drove one of the keys into the ceiling and it began to drip and bleed like an open wound. Red liquid smeared her hands and ran down her arms, splattering on the floor. But I could see moonlight and stars above. "See," she said, "this is why I buy my pants from the men's section. Pockets. And the ladies in the office always made fun of me." I climbed up on the counter next to the fridge as she opened the hole in the ceiling wider with her car keys, sawing at what looked like flesh as the yellow ceiling opened up, creating a gaping hole, exposing the night sky. "Come on," she said, helping me up. The two of us crawled out through the gap in the ceiling, and I felt the beautiful, cool night air on my face and I breathed it in, gasping. It was so much better than what was in there, in that horrible place. I looked down to see the gap in the ceiling remained, and if I wanted to go back, I could just go down there. But who in their right mind would ever want to do that? When I glanced back up, I saw the woman was gone, as if she had never existed in the first place. My car keys were in my hand, as I had been the one to cut through the ceiling. When I thought back, I even remembered doing it. Had the woman been a hallucination, a ghost, or somebody who had jumped from this building in years past after being stuck inside of that place? Or just another creature conjured up by that twisted place which existed between dimensions, the backrooms between worlds? One thing was for sure, I would never go back there, never in a million years. I looked up and saw that I was standing at the edge of the building's roof looking down, but I didn't remember walking there. Backing away, my heart pounding in my chest, I looked around. The roof had no door leading back inside. There was no way to get off the roof, no way except back through that hole that I had come through. Either that or... I looked back down through the gap in the roof at the flickering yellow rooms and then at the ledge. As I walked back towards the edge of the building, once a year at least, somebody jumps from the roof of 4311 N Street, and this year it was long overdue.